for the introduction and the opportunity to connect with everyone today. I bring you greetings from the University of Maryland School of Medicine, where I wear many hats, and I was so excited to see many of you just a few weeks ago at your amazing inaugural, you call it choo-choo, but it was the Health Disparity Symposium. So thank you so much, Dr. Valerie, for inviting me. And so today, I am going to share with you a bit about some of the work that I've been doing at the University of Maryland. If you had attended the Health Disparity Symposium, I had a brief moment to kind of touch and highlight on some things, but this is a platform for me to unpack it a bit more, and more so particularly kind of have you appreciate my kind of diverse background and feet both within the biomedical arena and basic sciences for those basic scientists that are in the audience, as well as coupling that with my newfound appreciation for public health in the social science sphere. So I like to call this from cells to community, becoming a community engaged biosocial researcher. I have those disclosures. I don't have a slide for that, but I'll also unpack here. What you see to the left is the Chesapeake cohort lab, which I'll talk about as well, and how this had evolved. So first, I'd like to begin with this photo. Again, for those biomedical researchers, this might look very, very similar to your labs. I started University of Maryland in 2005 with a gung-ho, just really enthusiasm to pursue breast cancer research. And I show this slide because ultimately, when you see faculty in the laboratory, you just kind of think that they're there. But what I like to unpack is a little bit of my background, which helps to kind of shape where I am today and why I didn't just stay in the bench. So in the beginning, there was hope. There's me there, Londetta Jones on the phone, raised in Prince George's County, Maryland, living in Laurel, Landover, Greenbelt, all of those spaces. And I was the youngest of three. My dad never graduated high school. And hence when he came here to Washington, D.C. with his family, really the only job he could get was working for the National Park Service, and he was planting flowers. My mom, who started to go to college at Howard University to be a nurse, had quickly ended that sort of idea as she became basically the homemaker. And, which was a huge job within itself. I don't even want to belittle it and call it basically a homemaker. But indeed, our income at the time, with my dad, again, not having a high school degree, was maybe between $10,000 and $25,000. And so for me, my aspirations, I was about to graduate from high school, and my softball coach had asked me, "Hey, Londetta, you're about to graduate, what college are you going to? What are you going to do?" And I tell him with enthusiasm that I want to be a secretary because I love to type. And I said this, and he looked at me like I had two heads. And for him, he's like, you're about to be salutatorian of this school, and why aren't you going to college? And again, I told him my story. We didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't really have any guidance. But in that moment, he had connected me with counselors at the school. And next thing you know, I'm applying to colleges, one of which is Morgan State University right here, to which I was accepted with a full scholarship. And so with this hope actually came many opportunities. And as I mentioned, I attended here back in the early 90s, actually 1988 to be exact, as a chemistry major at Morgan State University. From there, I actually proceeded to be accepted into the Environmental Health Sciences Toxicology PhD program, where now I was taking that basic knowledge of chemistry and then applying it to really how chemicals impact the body and lead to disease. From then, I had studied liver cancer at Johns Hopkins, looking at the impact of a toxin called aflatoxin B1. But then I had started to think through about using animal models, and I had the opportunity to have two postdocs, one at the National Cancer Institute at NIH, Building 37, for those in the audience who ever worked at the NIH Bethesda campus, in the Laboratory of Experimental Carcinogenesis. There, for the first time, I started to work my hands with mice. How great is that? But really understanding the power of really animal models for studying human disease. My second postdoc was at Georgetown University Lombardi Cancer Center, where I was still working with a mouse model, but then more specifically looking at the impact of one genetic mutation called BRCA1 and how women with these mutations are often have high susceptibility to breast cancer, but of course, we can't study this progressive disease in women. And so the idea was we had this really powerful conditional knockout mouse model that had a mutation in a gene similar to what we see in women. And with that, we were able to really track the disease real time. So being armed with that background, solid foundation in chemistry, toxicology, now looking into a disease which really impacts a lot of women today, I was able to weave all of those together and land my first faculty position here at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. And this was in 2005. You'll see if you look at my website now that my secondary appointment is actually pharmacology, which indeed was my primary appointment when I first got here, because I mentioned that I was working in the laboratory. And then along the way to that experience, I'll share with you how now I've switched to pharmacology to epidemiology and public health. So as I mentioned, we had this BRCA1 mutant mouse model of breast cancer. And these, for those who are not familiar with H&E slides, you're able to take out the tissue from the mouse, slice it in really, really thin, slice it, and stain it with this hematoxylin and eosin color, where the purple is really denoting mammary epithelial cells. So these are the cells that indeed, if their growth is not controlled, it'll progress into cancer. And so here in this first panel is the normal appearing ducts. But over time, with this mouse and this mutation, that genetic mutation in BRCA1 started off with simply a perhaps hyperplasia, which you see here is some growth, and then progressing on to these hyperplastic alveolar nodules, all the way to a solid tumor. And as you can see on the right, I had opportunities with wonderful people in the lab, some of the people that you saw in the first slide, who were able to help me to move the field forward to really understanding how things like estrogen levels and progesterone levels, hormones that are normally present in our bodies, but how for women with BRCA1 mutations, they're most highly susceptible to not only the varying hormone stimulation, but also environmental estrogens that I was studying at the time, one notably bisphenol A. So again, combining my chemical toxicology background into a real life disease, breast cancer. So a funny thing happened to me one day in the laboratory, and I had this public health perspective, and I peeked out of my lab, and one day I learned, oh my gosh, there's people out there. To which, for those, again, who are in the biomedical sciences, working in the lab can be very isolated, and it's very rare that you come in contact, at least with people that are outside our scientific circles. And so picking out my lab, I met these wonderful women, as you can see, in varying shades of pink. The woman at the top, her name was Marlene King, who also worked at the University of Maryland, Baltimore as a staff member. And she just called me up one day in 2008 and said, you know, Dr. Jones, I'd love to meet you because you're the first breast cancer researcher who's African American that I ever met. And I heard that and I was like, oh my gosh, you're the first breast cancer survivor that I ever met. And saying that in 2008, now that diagram that I showed you when I started in breast cancer, I started in 2000, but of course I've been in research and cancer research since the early 90s. And so it really had an impact and a profound change in my life. And I I met her and all these wonderful women that you see that I call my flowers, because they're the ones that encourage me to continue in the breast cancer research. And I serve as their education lead for the Journey Continues, which is currently still working today. Finally, they have been able to meet back in person. They're meeting right now by monthly at a church here in Baltimore called Huber Memorial. Anybody needing more information, feel free to reach out to me. But this is, as you note at the top, I write my experiential learning, because there's the academic, the theory, but then there's the practice and the actual application of the work that we do in the field, whether we know it or not. And so these women were the ones who taught me about health disparities, that the molecules and the DNA that I was looking at that was mutated in the mouse models, that was really only part of the story, but that actually health disparities and potentially reasons why, unfortunately, African American and Black women are dying a lot more than other race and ethnicity groups is beyond this biology. Biology does matter. So I don't want to, put the claim that it's not important, but we really need to look at a bigger picture. And that's really what they encourage me to do. And so I'm learning, experiential learning from them about these social determinants of health, which is big words that I never learned in my biology. And they asked me, they actually gave me the courage to kind of reconsider what is health. And oftentimes in our biomedical models, we think of health as simply is not simply the absence of disease. And again, the biomedical models is about removing the disease. But what they taught me was that, health is a bit more complex. And I started to gravitate towards this Myers-Kirch model of health, which is similar to many of the other adaptations of the social ecological model that was originally adapted by Whitehead et al. But this model I like because it talks about health being a complex adaptive system, and that here in the center, these three concentric circles have the beginnings of an individual. We're all individuals, but we don't live in a bubble. We are encompassed by a society or local communities, and then a larger degree of our environments, whether it's our built environment or the natural environment, back to the environmental health sciences and the toxicology of what might be floating in our air or our water. But all of these are somehow impacting whether a person stays healthy or not. And that's built into the demands that they have on their plate that they might meet or have to meet. I'm a mom, 2 kids, married, and also their biologically given potential. So what are some of the genes that they had grew with that may have predisposed them to certain diseases? But then also over here, the personally acquired potential that we think across from birth to death that will increase. But unfortunately, as we know, these potentials, the housings, the cars, the finances vary for different people. So all of these complexities, again, were beyond my basic science background that I started to learn at the beginning from these wonderful breast cancer survivors. And then I had started to read literature this one here from JAMA, where it talks about housing as health. Again, something I never considered in the biomedical field, but the statement right here that housing as a vaccine to prevent illness and disability, really helped me to think out of the box a bit more from what I had been taught just at the biological level. So now, as I'm thinking forward about, the cancer field that I am in and this idea of advancing cancer health equity. So we know that although mortality rates are declining in the US from cancer in recent decades, and so actually some populations are experiencing some benefits, but some populations are not experiencing benefits from the cancer prevention, the early detection and treatment, and survivorship care that we know that works. And that many potentially preventable cancer deaths, they're continuing to occur, and particularly among disadvantaged populations, ethnic minorities that are often bearing a disproportionate burden. So moving forward, starting to think about how reducing the burden of cancer and eliminating cancer-related disparities, it's going to require a lot more than bench scientists, but it's going to require a more focused and coordinated action across multiple sectors, and most importantly, in partnership with communities, particularly those communities who are impacted by the health disparities of cancer. So as I started to learn more about this public health field and CBPR, community-based participatory research, which is the acronym here to the left, I started to realize that, for a long time, myself, many of my colleagues, were here. We don't really have community engagement. And actually, this is fine, and I'm not saying it in a negative way, because for certain basic science experiments and some secondary data analysis, it might not, this community engagement may not, and for many, would think that it might not fit. But I recognize for me, I'm moving more over to the far right of the screen, where I am thinking, for my work in health disparities and community-based participatory research, some of the basic principles is that you want community involved in all aspects of the research. And in my world, I'm trying to look more at even the conception of the research questions that I even decide in the first place. And this can be quite challenging because, again, you saw that tree of training, the training from the chemistry, the toxicology, the breast cancer. And in reality, as scientists, we're often trained in what we know. But when you start to integrate the reality of what's happening in communities, they may not always align with the theory that we've learned in our laboratories and the training that we have been sort of designated to do. So I started to think about identifying allies in this work. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm a basic scientist. What is out there in the world for basic scientists, and really connecting with survivors, in addition to the breast cancer group that I met. And so, believe it or not, the American Association for Cancer Research, the conference that actually Dr. Valerie is coming from now, wish I was there, Valerie, I learned about a scientist survivor program for the first time that they had, where they actually paired together scientists and survivors to not only navigate this humongous meeting that has many, many posters, many presentations, but that the survivors themselves can actually present work that they had done in their own space, and we're paired with persons so that we can navigate some of the tough questions of science as well, and understand how is the survivor thinking about the work that we do as biomedical scientists. So this was just a picture of 1 year. I think it was actually my first year, back in 2017, with various colleagues here. It was really an amazing opportunity for me to recognize that there's other people out there that are thinking what I'm thinking as well, and kind of a community that I could lean on to really see how my work could be actualized. And one person in particular, Bob Ritter, who at the time was a breast cancer survivor, but now also a prostate survivor. I like this quote that he said: people with cancer want scientists involved in cancer research to understand that they are more than cells or molecular pathways. And that quote stuck with me, along with all the things that I've been learning along the way in that experiential learning process from the breast cancer survivors. From the journey continues, and it continues even today. And so I was met at a crossroad here. I like this quote by Robert Frost: "Two roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by." And it's really made all the difference. And I can't say that enough of how the difference in the road that I traveled, that I was seeing at the time for basic scientists, myself, many people not trotting, but I knew that I had to make a change. And what that change was I had mentioned about the idea of going back to school 15 years later. So I graduated from Hopkins in 2000, but now in 2015, I made the choice. I really need to learn more. And at the time, oops, I paused my screen. Okay, at the time, I decided to take on as my capstone at the time at the University of Maryland College Park, where Dr. Cheryl Knott had a project called Project HEAL. This was an amazing opportunity for me to, not only as I was learning the didactic information in classes, but I'm actualizing my dream of, really merging together my basic science understanding of cancer with the actual community engagement. And the Project HEAL, we had an opportunity to, as you see in the front, there's a male and a female, what we call CHA, Community Health Advisor, who we had trained, so a kind of train-the-trainer program to actually deliver cancer education to the persons in the church. This was a beautiful opportunity for me because it not only resonated with my professional background, but as a person who I kind of feel, I tell the story, I feel like my mom had me on the pew in the church because I've been going to church as long as I remember. This was just an amazing MPH project. Yes, it was hard, but it was well worth it. And so I graduated in 2018. You can read one of our articles that came out of this. I'll be sharing the slides at the end. But as I started to venture out and think through, so how could I then make my impact, my footprint? And I started to think about what was kind of missing in the space. And one of the things that was looming was this idea of lack of trust. Which has been around for years. Certainly as basic scientists, we, and I say we because even though I may not have been around with the Henrietta Lacks or with the Tuskegee unfortunate experimentation, not experiment, but the unfortunate happenings that happen surrounding those studies, as basic scientists, that is the culture that we're in. And even though I might look a lot like the communities that I'm hoping to serve, I enter into that space with the humbleness, with a gratitude of even being present to try to, as this overarching question says, how do you build these relationships between the non-academic and the academic communities that can hopefully collectively work together to improve health and inequities. And so that's really kind of the backdrop of what I'm doing now. There's a lot of other moving parts that I'll share with you, but it's really about bringing these two worlds together, from professional, academic backgrounds, community, and civic organizations, to build a culture that fosters relationships, trust, and respect across all participants, which I know many people in the audience, including many of my friends and colleagues that I know are doing right now. And so my first community partners was the Ulysses and Chrysalyn Archie, who are the co-founders of an organization called the Baltimore Gift Economy. I met them while I was a student, actually, in the MPH program, and they so graciously allowed me to do service learning with them as they had their organic food market. I love the interaction. It was love at first sight, and what they were doing and how they were, serving the community, trying to teach people to share what they have, regardless of, what that was. And I told them, when I finished, and they didn't know I was a faculty at the time, I would love to work with you. And so that invitation actually led us to compete successfully for a grant through our school, where we were able to get money to create a new paradigm for seminars. And what we were thinking about doing was, I know in both here at Morgan, in spaces at UNB, there's a typical faculty-led seminar. And what we were really looking at doing was creating, how do we create this co-teaching, co-learning, or having both the faculty and the community member both leading a seminar. And not just any seminar, but particularly those seminars that had the topic surrounding health disparities. And so while we thought this was a good idea, we wanted to know what both the community and faculty in that space were thinking, and was this even feasible about creating? And so my first project out there, we had launched a few focus groups. There's myself and Chrysalyn, who were the co-facilitators. Ulysses was actually having the videography of these sessions, and we were able to really have a focus group with the faculty alone, the community alone, and then we actually had everybody combined asking questions like, for the faculty, what are some of the resources or activity that are around to help you gain knowledge about the surrounding community? To which we actually learned there weren't a lot, depending on the school. Some schools, like School of Social Work, School of Nursing, had a lot more opportunities, but there were some schools that didn't. And for those not familiar with UNB, we have 6 different professional schools, and I had representation from each of those schools, including medicine, social work, pharmacy, law. I said medicine, social work, law, a couple others I'm seeing the dental school, and a few others. But again, not many resources. We also asked both groups about what were some of the barriers to gaining trust and ideas for establishing trust. And then also, ultimately, in the end, if we were to have this, what would be the value? What would be some of the incentives, if you will, for even community to participate? As we know, oftentimes, community partners are just invited and don't really, aren't often provided incentives, whether it's finances or otherwise, to actually participate. So we were able to publish these results in the journal below, which again, I'll share the slides with you so you can take a look at. And we're also at the moment finding an opportunity to go back to our Community Engagement Center to share these presentations. We've already shared them with some of our colleagues at the Maryland in one of our seminars, as well as Johns Hopkins as well. And so one of the things I'd like to share that came from this, coincidentally, was an opportunity to present in our University of Maryland School of Medicine mini medical school. And so you see these two pictures here, both Ulysses and I at the top and at the bottom, where over 200 participants attend these. They're about 6-week sessions that happen yearly prior to the pandemic. And there just happened to be an empty spot in the first week that I had proposed for Ulysses and I to actually present our co-teaching, co-learning. And he at the time was an adverse, or still is, ACE trainer, adverse childhood experiences. And of course, I was teaching stress to the medical students and the pharmacology behind it. So we gave a partner lecture where I talked a bit in lay language about the biology, and Ulysses was able to share some actual strategies of relieving stress. And we thought from the reviews that it was well received. Progressing further along this path, I was able to participate in addressing urban health disparities through participatory health research, led by Dr. Payam Shakateri, who's in the audience, and others on his staff who came here to Baltimore for the first time in a while. I don't know if that was the first US-based meeting, because I know you're going soon this year to Ireland. But it was also another amazing opportunity for us to share our results, but also to take a look at other groups around the globe who are also doing a lot of this same participatory health research. And it was very enriching and rewarding to learn about others in the field. And so I put this definition here. Again, many of you in the audience are familiar with participatory health research, and some of you might be seeing this for the first time, but just letting you know that there's many names that's used here in the US and abroad. I know it seems that the community-based participatory research, or CBPR, is most common here, but it's really finding ways to maximize the participation of those whose lives or work is the subject of the research, again, in all stages of the research process. And so working alongside of these wonderful people from ICPHR, I was invited to co-author and share in a publication where we actually started to really think through how do these partnerships work, most often through academia and community academic partnerships, and where we had focus groups across the globe, and really kind of focused on that topic of, how is that power hierarchy actually addressed? Is it measured? Because clearly, as we know, in many academic research, there's often a power differential that must be faced and negotiated. And so we collected global perspectives on this, and you can also take some time to read the references, the publication from this. And so just ending with a few kind of products that came from this and next steps for me. And I kind of thought about this picture here. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And here I was, taking my first baby steps on my own. I shared with you a lot of the collaborators who helped me to work alongside them to produce and to train in the world of participatory health research. And now here's an opportunity for myself. And where I started to think about foundationally was ways to demystify the science, and how often learning from a lot of my non-science colleagues, how when we as scientists speak, we speak in languages that are not clear and understandable by the lay public. And so one of the things I found myself being with these two backgrounds, both in basic science, both in now public health, is what's called as a knowledge broker. So I felt a bit multilingual I can speak scientists. I can connect with clinicians and having learned and partnered with them in much of their work, but also public health. But finding ways to translate the information to the public in ways that is understandable, but not only in that unidirectional way, but how can I listen to, as I had been listening to the breast cancer survivors, how do I translate the information, the lived experience that they know, and hopefully allow scientists to understand the need and really design of perhaps experiments in ways that'll be impactful and comprehensive and relevant to communities. And so my first step, or at least one of the first steps that I had done, was I launched a workshop called Cells to Communities, similar to the title that you heard at the beginning. And this was held for 6 weeks at really online. And here we had a multitude of speakers, both the survivors' perspectives. We had speakers that were able to talk about their lived experience, caregivers. We also had trainees on board as well. And so having that interaction between both the scientists and survivor, similar to the AACR conference, as well as my colleagues who are in Cornell University, who has been doing this for several years now, Bob Ritter and Bob Weiss. But we were able to have the trainees try to talk in lay language about their research, and actually having a trainee presentation competition where the trainees presented in the best way possible of their research, and the survivors were the actual judges. I didn't do this alone, but also had the wonderful support from the colleagues you see here on the right, some survivors, some students, as well as scientists. And so thinking again about that multi-stakeholder transdisciplinary research, or education in this case, approach. We had a subsequent opportunity to actually present our work at the International Cancer Education Conference. And so this was actually a combination of what I told you before about the scientist-survivor connection, but then bringing in my new lens of cancer health disparities and cancer health equity. And this was a really great opportunity for myself and my colleague, Dr. Deborah Schredt, who is also in the Cells to Communities workshop, to really start to think about, when we think about designing experiments, programs, educational programs, how do we make sure that we are designing it in a way with cancer health equity lenses? There's a terminology, design for the margins, which I believe came from the tech field, but more appropriately in the public health space, I've heard it called human-centered design, but really taking the human to the center of the work that we do. And so this again was another opportunity to kind of stretch out into blending, emerging into the biosocial researcher realm that I was headed towards. And these are just some of the survivors. Again, to the bottom here, my colleague Bob Ritter, Deborah, and I, we had a really wonderful time. And these again were also recorded as some of the survivors had shared through their experiences and some of their thoughts about addressing health disparities with a health equity lens. So beyond that, there was another grant opportunity, both Ulysses and Crystal and I had applied for, as well as by this time, my husband, because this was over the pandemic, we had been spending a lot of time together, notably, but learning about his social science background and lens, blending with my biomedical lens and thinking through how we can really design a partnership. And I mentioned before that Ulysses and Crystalline and I had been a partner, but we didn't go into it with say, an MOU or anything formal. But now with this grant, the Johns Hopkins ICLR was saying, hey, we want you to spend opportunities to design community engaged research partnership, and what kind of relationship building activities or infrastructure or governance for research partnerships would you develop? And this, I really was the first time I ever seen this. For those of you who have perhaps applied for CBPR, community-based research grants, is usually going in, having everything figured out when you are submitting the application, much like a typical NIH grant. But this really allowed us time to really think through, how do we want to govern our partnership? And essentially, like I said, my husband, Brian Jones, community, and myself, academic, we started to emerge and have conversations about how we could formalize this, what we're calling the Chesapeake Cohort Lab, the Community Comprehensive Outreach and Health Disparities Research Team. Again, this is something that was designed by my husband, who he invited me to join. But essentially, it's teams of autonomous, talented persons and groups invited to work together and share power. Again, thinking through some of the concepts that we had kind of asked various persons in that paper publication that I shared before. But at the heart of this was leading to this idea of a transdisciplinary research for community and social impact framework. And this model from Tandu et al. Really honed in on this idea of dedicating time, and this time that's needed to be present, to respect, to understand, to communicate, that we hope ultimately will lead to the evolution of trust building, because trust and building trust takes time, and that genuine collaborative efforts might evolve, as well as knowledge exchange and gain, that ultimately, through this dedicating time, we would ultimately design comprehensive, context-specific information would be created and then used for the design of research and interventions that ultimately benefit the community. And so this final thing that I'll share is fast forward. Like, this came like at a flash of a light while we were building this partnership. They came an opportunity through the NIH to really establish a larger community academic partnership. And it's called, some of you may have heard of the Community Partnerships to Advance Science for Society, or COMPASS program. This was really an unprecedented, unheard of opportunity to advance health equity and catalyze societal change through research led by community organizations. So in other words, NIH for the first time was saying, community partners or community members, we want you to be the PIs. And indeed, that's what they were inviting. At the time, the eligibility of the community partner, Ulysses and Chrysalin, was not eligible because they are looking for a certain, perhaps more fiscally established community partner. But I was able to reach out to my church, Bridgeway Community Church, where they at that year was having a theme that was, how do we begin to live a life where we make everything better around us? And so essentially, Pastor Anderson, who's the pastor of the church, I had spoke with him. And next thing you know, it's, several conversations, he was on board, and I was really delighted to be able to partner with Bridgeway again as the lead PI, and I was serving as the lead researcher. Several persons from both Morgan and Hopkins who were a part of our J2 ICLR grant, including Dr. Valerie Oderamara is a part of it, several others. And we're just excited that we're going to be able to really think through how to create structural interventions. I showed these trees before that I'll just briefly go over now. Again, you'll have the slides, but really what you can see visually is that one tree is much more flourishing to the other. And this title, Our Environments Cultivate Our Communities and Our Communities Nurture Our Health, we're really seeing here on the left health outcomes. And these health outcomes are very, very broad and prominent when inequities are high and community assets are low, in comparison to the tree with the beautiful leaves that actually have the same health outcomes, but they pale in comparison. What's here at the bottom are these structural factors, and essentially that's what NIH wants us to really design an intervention for, these structural factors. And they're very tiny here, but they're from poverty, adverse living conditions, discrimination. Here on the tree to the left is giving rise to many of these health outcomes, in contrast to places and communities that have access to healthy food or quality housing. And so we thought about these two things, and looking at this tree, and for our application, we started to think about, well, what about this trunk in the middle? And the one thing that is really strong here in this tree also is this idea of a sense of community, the social networks, the participation and the leadership, in comparison to some communities that have fragmented systems and restricted power or disconnected members, unfortunately. So we're thinking through, how do we create the bridges between hope and opportunity? So I started off with the beginning of the slide about, in the beginning, there was just hope, me as a young person, and how I've had so many amazing people in my path who gave me the opportunity to really actualize and operationalize some of the thoughts and dreams and visions that I had. And so for this grant, we recognize that, yes, Bridgeway is an amazing church, has a lot of resources. It's in Columbia. But we're looking to partner with various communities here in Baltimore City as one part of the grant. And looking at these communities, not with a deficit lens, but with a lens of asset, that these communities have assets, they have hopes, they have dreams, and would just need, in often cases, opportunities. And how, as we as a church and all of the wonderful researchers who are partnering with us to look at a sort of transdisciplinary lens to address health disparities. And what that transdisciplinary team looks like, in addition to the biological sciences, which you see here, we're looking at health outcomes across the individual to the population health, much like that social ecological model that I showed earlier. We're also looking at a variety of researchers, both those who are in basic science, behavioral, but also clinicians in the healthcare system. And we're looking at the over the life course. And so put all together, again, this is a busy slide, but it really kind of summarizes our social biological or biosocial team that we've put together to really take a look at, from gestation to older adults, both those in the basic sciences, and those who are working at the interpersonal relationships, and those in the policy space. So I guess to take home is here, just reframing the narrative. I showed this picture at the bottom, health disparities, and how often persons, as you see in these clouds, they're in environments and communities where they really aren't able to see opportunities, but that this idea of discovery, seeing what everybody else has seen, but thinking what no one else has thought. And that's really what's governing kind of my movement moving forward. The background that I shared with you, the partners that I'm meeting over time, that we're seeing a lot of need that's out there, and recognizing that the communities, the partners, by working together collaboratively, we can find ways to address health disparities. And so finally, I showed you this picture before, kind of also wearing the hat of, thinking through an embodied researcher. One of our collaborators on our team. She's a young cancer survivor, and as well as a cancer researcher, Dr. Christabel Chung. And she had told me about the term of being an embodied researcher, of kind of understanding the perspective of the population under study. And so how I had mentioned to you before about my parents not making a lot of money, and how we were encountering a lot of housing and health disparities, and how really it wasn't until high school that I had stable housing, but that, you know, my mom, who unfortunately passed away at the young age of 52. So thinking through that article I shared with you earlier about housing as a vaccine to prevent illness. So thinking through, again, the lived experiences, not only that I'm collecting and learning from the audiences and the communities that we'll be connecting with as we think through solutions, but also having experiences of my own that I'm bringing to the table. And hopefully that together we can design comprehensive, context-specific solutions for addressing health disparities. So just wanted to end with this take-home message. I mentioned that I was a chemistry major here. This was a picture. There's Dr. Yu shortly after he became dean here, and Dr. Roosevelt Shaw, who had used to be the chair while I was going through. It was really a beautiful opportunity for me to come back and see a lot of my colleagues that you see here. That's me in the back, to kind of appreciate how I've come so far. And I'm really delighted and excited, just like this opportunity to come back and share with you, as well as the AACR conference that you are attending, Dr. Valerie, where these Cure Scholars, trainees that of one group of persons that I'm able to mentor, to bring them along the way. And then lastly, this picture here, I don't know if some of you may have known Jatia Mills. She was actually a student here who graduated, and she was in our Star Prep program. She's actually doing amazingly well at Virginia Tech, working on her PhD, and we are so excited to see her. Actually in May, they're having a prep symposium that I will be reconnecting with her. And just to let you know, I had flyers when I was at the health disparities. So if you know of any students who are graduating and would like to reach out to us, we would love to help them to actualize their dreams to acquire a PhD. Okay, so I'm just going to end here. I want to say thank you to, there's various mentors and advocates from wide and far, too numerous to name. I always, in most of my slides, have been starting to thank the Johns Hopkins security and custodial staff, who were the ones who often took me out of my slump as I was trying to give up on the PhD degree. There's past and present members of my lab and collaborators, including the Baltimore Gift Economy, the ICPHR, the Bridgeway Community Church, and most importantly, we'll thank also my husband, as I mentioned, who is the designer and creator of the Chesapeake cohort. So with that, I will thank you for your time and attention and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Londette. Neda's microphone seems to have failed. I'm not good at moderating.
It's so fine. It's
I can just say, wow, that was a different way, a new approach for presenting your life, your work, the whole journey. And so very inspiring. I wish we had a lot more people, especially students who are aspiring to be like you. You know, it would be great to have them, but I'm glad we recorded. So, and we're still recording. Hopefully your message will be out there. Can't believe how much you and your mom look alike.
I hear that a lot. And And it's interesting when I was thinking of what to present today, because I recognize there's some people who only know me from the biomedical hat, and then there's some people that have entered into my space from the public health hat. But I don't think I've ever shared with you how all of that came together and how really my background sort of influenced that. So, and the connection and ties to Morgan. So I figured let's try something different. And just in case I'm not able to have one-on-one conversations with you, you
Yeah.
know where I've been and where we're hoping to go. And we're hoping to hear about the compass, hopefully soon, if we were awarded or not. So I'll keep you all posted.
And I hear you when you say then opportunity came, and a lot of times opportunities are great, but I'm not sure if they're always detours of what we really wanted. And are they taking us somewhere we never thought? And because you never know, because there's only one path you can go down, right?
Yeah.
You can't do it over and over. It's not like a video game or something. So I hear you. But so if you could go back and if you could have chosen one fixed path among all the different hats, which is your favorite hat?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a great question. Um, and you're right. Some of us come with, kind of scripts and think that, okay, this is the way it should go. I think that the path that I've chosen to move into the biosocial space, something I'm actually hoping to create more. I'm seeing a little glimpse of it. But I think I'm better with that because you're right. I thought at first when I finally saw that NIH R01 grant that said, hey, find the genetic risk factors for breast cancer, I knew that was for me. And finally, it was here. But that was after I had met the breast cancer survivors who were telling me more. So I think the path that I chose is the right path for me because it embodies probably more of me. I'm a people person, and being in the lab is kind of difficult and lonely.
Ah,
But I'm also someone who likes to think more broadly. And so, but the challenge is it's new, right? So how do you find the right funding mechanisms that NIH is predominantly biomedical, and then other spaces, I'm still a new card carrying member of the public health space. So they don't always look at me as, is she genuinely public health? And so it's that's why I have wonderful people like, I am who and others who have helped to navigate and, take me under their wing until I find the spaces that will accept both the biosocial researchers. We're starting to see more. So I like the path that I've chosen to mix.
I also asked about your hat.
My hat. So I wear way far too many hats, but they're starting to make sense. I see I'm an educator trainer first. So I love the hat of being the associate director of our postbac program. And the various hats that I wear as educators within the School of Medicine. So I see that's probably the hat that I choose to prefer because I can teach as well as train in this new space as well of the research.
That's partly because of your preference for being with people rather than in a lab.
Probably, yeah. But thanks for that question.
Anyone has any questions?
I want to just make a quick remark, and I have to jump off for another meeting. And you just said something in the last few minutes that really resonated, and that's the space at NIH for the what are you calling it?
Biosocial, yeah, research.
Social work. And I think that's really something that we need to talk up, especially in the RCMI community and have it sort of dwell up through the RCMI community, I think,
Mhm.
into the general NIH space. But thank you for saying that. I think that's really something for us to advocate about, because they're keeping these things so separate.
Oh, yeah. And actually the RCMI is the first space in even your objectives that I see that being articulated. So I wholeheartedly agree with you that,
And I think it very much bubbled up from the RCMI community.
yeah.
Thank you. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
heard the shorter version at the conference last week, but you always add some little tidbits that keep it interesting and exciting. So I have to leave for another meeting now.
All right, Christine, great
Goodbye.
seeing you.
It's all yours.
So if we have no other questions, we would like to thank Dr. Jones for again sharing with us this afternoon. So thank you, thank you, thank you.